The timelines for artificial intelligence are moving up once again. We will have human-level intelligence by 2025, artificial general intelligence by 2028. Meanwhile, the world is scrambling to figure out how to make these things safe. And oh yeah, DARPA wants to build an AI scientist. We will explore all of these things and more on today's The Great Indoors. So today I'm going to start with the always awesome Dwarkesh Patel podcast. He just absolutely crushes it with those interviews. I love watching them. He interviewed Shane Legg last week. Now I know technically this is last week's news, but if you'll recall, I didn't do a real show last week, so I'm playing catch up just a little bit. Last week he spoke with Shane Legg, who is the founder and chief scientist over at Google DeepMind, and it was a pretty incredible conversation. One of the questions that Dwarkesh asked was, how do we know when we will have artificial general intelligence? And Shane gave, I think, one of the most concise definitions that I've heard yet. And I'm going to paraphrase here. He says, we will know that we have artificial general intelligence when we fail to find a cognitive task that it is unable to do. That's a pretty concise definition. I mean, if you can imagine, a general intelligence should be able to do any cognitive task that a human could. So if you can find a cognitive task that it fails at, then likely you don't have an AGI. That's the kind of definition that makes me not mind the term AGI. You know, I historically I love the term AGI. As far back as like 2005, when I read The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. You know, back then he didn't use the term AGI, he had the term singularity. Oh my gosh, that was like 20 years ago almost. And remember, like at that time, we were still 2 years away from an iPhone. I mean, technology looked very different back then. And I remember reading Kurzweil's prediction thinking, my gosh, these are like these amazing, mind-boggling landmarks that were still like a couple of decades out. But even then, 2030, while it sounded like a futuristic date, right, nearly 30 years away, seemed so close. Like, holy cow. But back then, you know, it was like a dot on a map that was still really, really far away. In those terms, it felt like it was a very specific thing, and we would know it when we see it. You know, it's not till you get to a place like that that you realize that, oh, it's not just a dot on a map. It's like this whole thing, and there are landmarks all throughout it. And, you know, it's not this tidy concept that you thought it was. But that definition almost makes me feel like it's worth keeping. But I was delighted to hear that Shane follows Kurzweil, and he's been following him since 2001 with the Age of Spiritual Machines. And like Dario Amodei, who we talked about a couple of episodes ago, it was also a fundamental revelation for Shane for two reasons that he explains in the interview. That one, right around the 2020s, we should have enough data and compute that we can build something significantly closer to human level intelligence. But also that the scale would get big enough that we would have human level intelligence by, well, most likely 2025, but no later than 2028. And in this interview, he still feels that, you know, 50-50 chance that we should see AGI by 2028. Maybe by 2029. I mean, there are still things that could go wrong. It's research. It doesn't always go the way we want it to. But what struck me about this conversation is that he says he doesn't really see any major roadblocks to get there. That all of the problems we're trying to contend with right now in trying to build human level intelligence, that there's really a path to figuring those things out. Some of those things include certain types of memory, right? Humans have different types of memory. We have a shorter term memory, a longer term memory, but also a kind of in-between memory. And that's something that AI doesn't really have right now. I suspect something that Google is working on as we speak. But once you figure out those different aspects of the human brain and human intelligence that the large language models of today don't really match, that's when you'll start seeing human level intelligence really come into existence. But Dwarkesh went on to ask him about alignment, and I'm glad he did, because it seems that Shane's personal opinion on alignment was that we would teach artificial intelligence our human ethics, that we would train human ethics into the model, that it's not a technical problem to decide what those ethics are. That's for political discussions, ideological discussions, but we would train those ethics into the model, and that would be the solution for alignment. This strikes me as what I will call a Lacanian alignment approach, right? This is from Jan LeCun, who kind of has the same opinion I've seen in the past, where he'll say, well, we'll just teach them not to be bad, right? That it's just sort of this hand-wavy, well, it's fine. We'll they're ours, we program them, and we'll just teach them not to do bad things. And in a sense, yeah, with today's technology, with today's programming, that makes sense. Our programs do what we ask them to do. But recall, neural networks are not deterministic. They're stochastic. We don't really know what's going on inside of a neural network. And so Dwarkesh pressed Shane with what I would consider the point of view of, from someone like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who would say, yeah, but what if they decide not to follow your ethics? At some point, we're talking about an intelligence that is at or beyond human level intelligence. So what if they decide not to follow your ethics? Or worse, they pretend to follow your ethics and deceive you into believing that they do. That's scary. And I didn't really hear a good response to that question. But definitely head over and check out that interview and give it a listen for yourself. It's fantastic. Dude, forgot to turn my pumpkin on. It's crazy, I can't do a show without a pumpkin. I mean, Halloween is over, but that doesn't mean you gotta put the pumpkins away. No. On Monday, the White House released an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. Okay, this one generated a little bit of controversy because there are, in particular, some requirements around the limitations of the amount of compute people can do when building foundation models. And the reason people were upset about this is because it could adversely impact open source efforts, which I think right now are contributing quite a bit to the community. There is an argument that at some point open source becomes really complicated, because when your AI systems get to a point where you can do really nefarious stuff with it, that's not something you just want anyone to have. But there were a lot of great things in here, ensuring that there was protection for Americans from AI-generated fraud, deception campaigns, phishing attacks, establishing an advanced cybersecurity program to develop AI tools to find and fix vulnerabilities in critical software. I was also really interested to see that there was a call for a pilot of the National AI Research Resource, which seems like it will be a tool to help academia and other researchers. Academic institutions have a hard time acquiring all the compute you need in order to build one of these so that they can do research on it, like how to make them safe. So this should help academic institutions and other researchers get the resources they need to help do the work that is really, really important. But now we're going to head back over to Dwarkesh Patel's podcast. What can I say? I'm a fan. Who had a conversation this time with Paul Christiano, who is the head of the Alignment Research Center, who is one of the leading researchers on AI alignment, for an incredibly in-depth conversation on alignment, among other things. It was a 3-hour conversation. If you have the time, I highly recommend you check it out. But their conversation ranged from what does a world look like with AI in the future to how do we align these things? Listen, if you've listened to Paul Christiano talk about AI alignment, his outlook is not rosy. It's not. He does not seem to genuinely believe that we will successfully align AI systems in time. And so when he talks about AI getting to human level capability and beyond, he tends to refer to those as end of days. And it's very shocking if you're not used to hearing people talk about the alignment problem. But overall, he feels like we won't have the time to build the type of AI system that we would want to build, that instead there is a race to be the first to get there. But the conversation also turned to what predictions he had in terms of AI capabilities. And rather than frame it in terms of artificial general intelligence, they framed it in terms of when would an AI be capable of building a Dyson sphere? And for those of you who aren't familiar, a Dyson sphere is the notion of building infrastructure around a star like our sun, such that we could capture a maximal amount of energy coming from the sun in order to power human civilization or whatever civilization we have at that point. But he gave the prediction of 15% likelihood that by 2030, 2030, an AI would be capable of doing this, and 40% likely by 2040. Now, we just got done hearing that we would get human level AI by 2025, and AGI, 50% likelihood AGI by 2028. But by 2030, it would be able to build a Dyson sphere around the sun. I want you to close your eyes a minute and imagine what kind of bonkers world we live in where things are moving that fast. And that seems to be the world we are heading towards, according to all of the folks who are leading the research on this. Now you see why I wanted to make a channel where I talk about AI. Again, it's a lengthy conversation. I am a huge fan of the fact... Is that my dog making all that noise? Hang on. This is why I should not have a YouTube channel. Right here. This right here. But not to love on Dwarkesh Patel too much this episode, please go check out his conversation with Paul Christiano. It is incredible. Which brings us to Wednesday. Wednesday, the Global AI Summit happened. Actually, it happened over the course of a few days. But on Wednesday, I think it wrapped up. And... what is this? What? I want you. Oh my God, it's one of these websites. Their website is broke. Hey buddy, you got any, no? Okay, whatever. Okay, cool. Which brings us to Wednesday, where we had the Global AI Summit, which wrapped up and was considered a resounding success. 28 countries, which include countries from the EU, the United States, China, all have agreed that AI poses significant risks. And they signed what was called the Bletchley Agreement. And Yoshua Bengio, who is one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence, will be chairing an international State of the Science report. Essentially, corporations have agreed to work with governments to conduct pre- and post-deployment testing of their next-generation models. And the AI Safety Institute will evaluate those models. Shortly after the conclusion of the summit, Elon Musk sat down with Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister of England, to have a conversation about the agreement that had been reached. And one thing I was interested to see is that they both agreed that it was a really good thing that China was invited and signed the agreement along with everyone else. Because you can't really have a global conversation about AI safety without the globe, or a reasonable sampling thereof. I mean, if you've been tracking AI development in the recent year, I would say, it's remarkable how far we've come from nobody really paying attention to artificial intelligence at the end of last year to things starting to get noticed, the capabilities get noticed, but then alignment still hadn't caught up. The safety concerns still hadn't caught up. Researchers were still talking yeah, it's possible that we could all be wiped out by this. And nobody having a real reaction to that like you would expect. And now, finally, here we are towards the end of the year. The world has taken notice, and we're starting to have a conversation about these things. This is good. MIT professor Max Tegmark revisits the TED stage, where he talks about AI, AGI, and alignment. Tegmark is one of the more vocal opponents of runaway capabilities in artificial intelligence before we're able to control and align the AI. Tegmark's research is in mechanistic interpretability. If you're familiar with AI, you'll know that neural networks are a bit of a black box for researchers. It contains billions of parameters, all of which are essentially matrices of numbers. We don't know how those relate to the answers that neural networks spit out at the end of their calculations. Mechanistic interpretability would allow researchers to pinpoint the exact parameters that are associated with certain concepts like Paris or hot, and be able to go in and change the values such that you could modify what the neural network produces. It's kind of like if you were to take the human brain, go in and identify which of the neurons light up whenever you think of Paris, and quiet those down and instead light up the neurons associated with when you think of New York, so that every time you tried to think of Paris, you thought of New York. Those are the kind of safeguards that researchers are thinking of when they try to align AI. Look at them! They're dancing! Look at them go. Ah! Jeez. It's Tom Cruise. It's not Tom Cruise. Don't be fake. Deep fakes are a problem, right? But there's been a lot of progress in mechanistic interpretability lately, and so I think Tegmark is a little bit hopeful that we'll be able to catch up on that research. But as we just heard, we're expecting human level intelligence by 2025. So, hurry. But it was a really great talk, and I highly recommend you go and check it out. On Thursday, over at sam.gov, DARPA released a call for proposals. They have a new project related to the AI Forward initiative. DARPA is trying to build AI scientists. That's right. We've heard for a long time now about the benefits of artificial intelligence, not the least of which was the fact that AI could help humans propel scientific research. We've seen papers on that in the past, like the Carnegie Mellon paper, where the researchers tried to make an automated agent who would carry out scientific experiments. Well, DARPA is trying to build a scientist that is much more capable than just carrying out experiments. They're looking for a scientist that can come up with hypotheses, test those hypotheses, and do all of the work, start to finish, that scientists do now. I'm just going to read this because I think it's so interesting. The goal of this project aims to explore, develop, and demonstrate an autonomous scientist, i.e. an AI agent, capable of skeptical learning and reasoning to act as an aid to human scientists. This AI must use scientific reasoning to generate creative hypotheses and experiments, and refine said hypotheses to enable scientific discovery at speed and scale. Can we stop and imagine for a moment a world in which we have an AI agent that can do this? Because if you have an AI agent that can do this, you have 1,000 AI agents that can do this. But it gets even better. This project is broken up into two parts. The first is to build an autonomous scientist. The second is to figure out how to evaluate creativity. Now, the first part reminds me a little bit of the conversation between Legg and Dwarkesh Patel, where Shane talks about how there's this part of memory that allows humans to do a search in the memory space for these gems that allow humans to come up with new ideas. Like with current AI systems, they do a really good job with blending known concepts together, like reading Harry Potter in the manner of a pirate. But what they're not so good at is coming up with new ideas. Humans are capable of doing this because we can sort of think through the search space, which is a huge space of all of the possible things you could do in trying to figure out how to solve a problem, and then pick out the one that seems the most feasible, and in essence coming up with a new idea. Here, DARPA looks like they want to do something similar, figure out how you can get AI to come up with novel ideas, novel hypotheses, in order to conduct experiments to test those hypotheses. But then in the second one, to come up with a way or an approach that can be applied to in any domain to measure the creativity of the proposed system and the scalability and time efficiency of any of those proposed systems. Can we just pause for a moment and just think about the fact that DARPA is trying to build an AI scientist? Like, this is the kind of thing that you would hear about in some crazy science fiction story. And here we are living it. And the timeline for this project is 18 months. So it's entirely possible that 18 months from now, we will live in a world where AI scientists are a reality. Bonkers! And it's only Thursday. Anyway, if you want to go check out that call for proposals, I will have a link to it in the description below. Also on Thursday, over on the No Priors podcast, they had Ilya Sutskevar on their show. Ilya is, of course, the chief scientist over at OpenAI who produced ChatGPT and is one of the foremost authorities on artificial intelligence in the world. And I have to say, it was a fascinating conversation. Listening to Ilya talk about building AI is like listening. I don't even know what to compare it to. The way he speaks about neural networks and how he closely relates them to the human brain is just fascinating. Especially because I've been reading a book on the brain and how it develops, and I see just how much similarity there is between the neural networks being used to power large language models like ChatGPT and the neural network of the human brain. This is it. The Self-Assembling Brain by Peter Robin Hiesinger. I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. But this has been an incredible book, and I'm looking forward to talking more about this when I finish. Now, I've talked about this a little bit before, about the similarities between the brain and the neural networks used to power artificial intelligence. And there are some things that stick out as obvious to me. And I was really happy to hear Ilya kind of confirm those intuitions that I had. And in particular, this notion that the frontier models that we use today have on the order of billions of parameters inside of them. And that's a low number of billions, because the amount of compute required to train those billions of parameters is just absolutely massive. I mean, we really are capped by the amount of compute that we have in order to make these things really incredible. But if each one of those neurons, those parameters in an artificial neural network, is representative of not so much a neuron in the human brain, but a neuronal connection, right? When the synapse fires and connects to other neurons in the brain, that is the rough comparison to a parameter in a neural network. And there are trillions of those connections. You start to see how when you scale up the artificial neural networks and how it's starting to approach the capabilities of the human brain, it's not hard to realize that if you continue to scale that up, then you're going to see it get closer and closer to the capabilities of the brain. And it's really exciting to think about what kind of capabilities we'll get as we continue to scale those up. But that's not all that's required. As Shane Legg points out, there are other things that are missing from large language models, like memory and all of the ways that humans use memory. The multimodality of all of our senses and how our vision and our hearing and our smell all combined into a really rich experience of data that allows us to navigate through our world. And so as these models become multimodal, as they scale up, you are going to see them get closer and closer to human level intelligence. And as you can probably imagine, that is not very far off. It is not an overly difficult engineering challenge to incorporate all of those senses. We already have multimodal models that are capable of understanding images and even video. We have models that have the functional equivalent of hearing, of smell. Google is rumored to have models already in-house that have this kind of rich multimodality. And when you solve for things like memory, when you scale up the parameters so that the neural networks can do more with all of this information, it really isn't that surprising that we will have a human level artificial intelligence by 2025. 2 short years away. Things are about to get wild. Also on Thursday, Elon Musk over at X tweeted out the following: excited to announce that Starlink is now a majority of all active satellites and will have launched a majority of all satellites cumulatively from Earth by next year. That is bonkers. Like, a majority of all satellites in space are now Starlink satellites. Like, between that and the real-time traffic information from Tesla, the amount of real-time data Elon Musk controls is crazy. He is like approaching like supervillain levels of power right now. I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but holy crap. But that's not all of the announcements he had. Just today, and we're filming on Friday, November the 3rd, Elon tweeted this out: tomorrow on the 4th, xAI, which is the new AI company that Elon started. He was originally one of the founders of OpenAI. And if you don't know the story there, he wasn't terribly happy with how that played out. And so now he started a new company with the goal of building an AI that presumably is more aligned with what he's looking for. Well, they are about to release their first AI to a select group tomorrow. So by the time this is out, that should already be released, and we should know a lot more about that. He says in particular, in some important respects, it is the best that currently exists. Wow. I am really excited to find out what they have in store. Also, another thing to look forward to, set your calendars, because on Monday, the OpenAI Dev Day is happening at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And I can only imagine what they have in store for announcements. Like, are we going to hear a little bit about GPT-5? Maybe a GPT-4 Vision API? Who knows? I will definitely be talking about them on the next episode. The last thing I want to leave you with is this post on X from Alex Reibman. This guy on TikTok is crushing job interviews with Fortune 500s and big tech using AI transcription and ChatGPT. This is insane.
Such as in jet engines or spacecraft re-entry, how do you approach these challenges?
Let me think about it. In aerospace engineering, selecting materials for high temperature application. So first,
so this guy got onto a VTC call doing an interview with some big tech company, and meanwhile turned on a co-pilot AI to listen to the question as it was being spoken, and would then answer it in real time. So the person would just read off what the AI told him, but to his credit, did it in such a natural way, inserting the and to make it sound very natural. This is the kind of weird stuff that's going to happen in a world with human level AI. All right, everyone, thanks very much for joining me this week, and I hope to see you next week on The Great Indoors. coffee time.